Good morning. I don't know how many of you are old-timers like me who've been at this show for over 10 years now, but it's amazing how much has happened, obviously, over that time. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what's been happening in the connected car space, what's happening in the broader automotive business, and then some of the problems that we still see. But it's interesting, if you think back, for those of you who've been here, 10 years ago, they had an awards dinner the night before, just like they have now, and literally almost every single award went to OnStar, because that was all you had in the telematics space, was OnStar. If you think back to where we were 10 years ago, there were no smartphones. There was no Uber. There was no Tesla. None of these things existed. And if you think back in our space, which is about providing dynamic content, state-of-the-art in traffic information was quite literally flying traffic helicopters and looking out the window to see what was happening. Obviously, there's been an enormous revolution in the connected car space in that time. I want to talk a little bit about what we've been seeing happening. INRIX, as many of you know, we've been a leader and a pioneer in this idea of collecting vehicle-based data and providing traffic information. The company was started with a very simple mission, and that was solve one of society's biggest problems, which was traffic congestion. A lot of people were talking about it, but how do you do that? And for us, the answer was build a massive crowdsourced network. Today, we have more than 275 million vehicles and devices. 275 million reporting to us every day where they're at and how fast they're going, which we use to create traffic data in more than 60 countries. And I think all of you know about what's been happening, obviously, in the traffic space. Probably fewer are familiar with what's been happening in the parking space. About 30% of urban congestion is caused by people driving around looking for parking spaces in the urban centers. So how do you solve traffic congestion? You have to look at parking. And about a year ago, we acquired a company called ParkMe, which was the leading provider of parking information. Not only real-time information about where there is parking, but where there's availability, where people can park, how much they charge. And now with partnerships we've done with Pay by Phone, Park Mobile, and others, you can now pay for parking directly from your smartphone or from your car. The idea being direct the person right to the parking spot, make them pay ahead of time, and you can solve, again, reduce congestion. Things like road weather. We announced last year at this show a road weather product, collecting vehicle-based data to create road weather alerts. And all that's tied together with a product we have called Auto-Intelligent, which is about machine learning and taking all that information and building intelligent analysis on that. But that's all about connected car. As Don mentioned, that's half the equation. If you want to solve traffic congestion, you have to work with cities. And what most people don't know is most of this data today is now being processed, analyzed, and is available to government agencies. More than 250 government agencies today are using vehicle-based data to help them figure out what's going on the roadways. More than half of the United States, more than half of the states in the Department of Transportation, countries like England and Denmark and Saudi Arabia and Dubai are all using this as part of smart cities applications. So in order to have a big impact, you have to not only have smart vehicle data and be able to mine that data and create intelligent results, but you need to provide that to smart cities as well so that they can use that to better manage their infrastructure. But let me talk about the broader trends. Right, they started the conference today by saying there's these three mega disruptive trends in the industry. We believe there's four, and we call them the ACEs. The ACEs stand for autonomous, connected, electric, and shared vehicles. Right, they forgot to talk about electric, which we feel is a major trend in terms of what's happening in the industry. I think everybody's familiar with autonomous. You probably will not have one speech today where they do not mention autonomous vehicles. Connected vehicles, obviously super important in terms of getting data, mining data, and creating interesting results based on that. Electric vehicles, I think people are very familiar with. The work that obviously Tesla, BMW, Chevy, and a variety of others have done in the electric car space and the electrification of the combustion engine. And then finally, shared vehicles. You heard from Zipcar today, obviously Uber, an enormous amount of announcements. All these trends are happening at once. I grew up in Detroit, and for 100 years, not much changed in terms of the automotive industry. And now, as I think we all know, everything is changing. But the more interesting question for me is, why is it all happening at the same time? Why is electrification and shared vehicles and autonomous and connect, why is it all happening at the same time? And of course, there's a variety of answers to that. You could say, well, Moore's Law, where transistor density has doubled every 18, 24 months, that's obviously helped. You could argue GPS. 16 years ago, GPS was only available to the military. Now, of course, it's embedded in almost everyone's pocket in this room has a GPS sitting in their pocket. You could argue, well, it's a bunch of other things like connectivity and things like that. And sure, the technologies have had a big impact. And we would argue that connectivity, the ability to connect people to the cloud, really underpins it all. Right? Autonomous vehicles would not be possible if you were not able to mine data and those vehicles could learn. Of course, Google is continually mining data, refining their algorithms, which is impacting how those vehicles drive. Electric vehicles would not be possible in the way they are today without that connectivity. Anybody who has a Tesla knows that they're continually updating the software and continually improving their range algorithms. And obviously, shared vehicles. If the majority of people did not have smartphones in their pockets that could summon a vehicle and they could see where they are, you would not have the shared vehicles. So certainly connectivity is part of it. But I would argue the other part is the market is stepping in where there are real problems to solve because governments have not been able to solve them. If you think about what autonomous vehicles are, it's really about safety and improving the safety and improving the experience because people are stuck in congestion and they want to sit there and read email as opposed to drive their car. If you think about electric vehicles, it's about reducing pollution, which is obviously a huge issue, not just here in the United States, but if you've spent time in Moscow or Beijing or Sao Paulo, you know that this is a real problem that cities are struggling with. And shared vehicles obviously address the issue of cost and address the issue of convenience. So what's exciting to me is the technology now exists for these things to happen, but at the same time, private companies are stepping in and recognizing we can have a big impact on solving some of these problems that governments have been unable to solve. For us, what's exciting is looking at this connected car. As many of you know, there's about 200 to 400 sensors on the connected car that can be accessed and that have information that's useful. And today, most of you know, things like speed, location, and heading are being collected to provide traffic information. So the traffic that you see on your map ahead of you is generated by the vehicles stuck in traffic ahead of you. That's being done on almost every connected car today. The majority of OEMs have traffic information that's being crowdsourced from other connected cars as well as mobile devices. But most people don't know that parking is very similar. Parking data is coming from vehicles. We're collecting data from when you put your vehicle in park. We're starting to collect accelerometer data in addition to real-time data from meters, garages, and a variety of other sources to create real-time views of where parking is available. And road weather, which I mentioned previously, where you can get traction control, you can get fog light status, windshield wiper status, and a variety of other bits that you can then use to compute and say, there's ice on the road 2 miles ahead. Or vehicles are slipping due to hydroplaning a mile ahead of you and you need to slow down. That sounds like science fiction, but that's live today. So all this data is now accessible and being collected anonymously, used to improve the overall consumer experience. And let me give you an idea about what that looks like. We have a visualization I want to show. This is based on real-time data that we collected in Cologne, Germany. Just to give you an idea of what this looks like. So this is Cologne, Germany. This is real-time data. The different dots that you see moving on this map are vehicles in real time. So you see the enormous density now of connected vehicles as well as mobile devices that are collecting this information. On the right, you see a road weather alert. We were able to compute based on the amount of rainfall and the amount of windshield wiper status where there's hydroplaning and where vehicles are slipping. As you get into the urban areas, obviously people are familiar with traffic influence routing and be able to direct people based on where current traffic is and things like road closures. But now as a vehicle gets into the inner city of Cologne, what you see is the bars represent where there's parking available. This is a block-by-block real-time analysis of where there's parking available by block. And this is obviously helpful for the user to direct them to where they need to go. So all of this information is being collected. In many ways, you have a real-time Sim City. If any of you have kids, you've probably seen the game Sim City, where it's a simulated city environment. And this is what you have now. With all this real-time information, there's a virtual now 3D representation of what's happening across the city, which obviously helps not only improve your commute, but it helps the cities better manage their overall infrastructure. But let me talk now about where we think the world's going to go. INRIX is a leading provider of content. We've worked with a variety of OEMs. But here's the problem. The list of content that people want in their car is growing. It started out, hey, we want traffic. That's a killer content. And then OEMs said, oh, we want parking. That's important. And we want weather. And we want a variety of other things. And if you look at what people are asking for, it's an enormous amount of applications and content in their vehicles. This study was done by Accenture, basically did a poll of several thousand people. And what you see is more than 77% of people want productivity applications in the car. Things like email and schedule and access to their productivity applications. 86%, probably no surprise, want entertainment. Things like Pandora and Spotify and Stitcher and a variety of other things to help them obviously pass the time that they spend in their vehicle. And 81% want information, things like news and sports and weather and things like that in their vehicles themselves. So the demand is growing. Of course, the problem that exists, and we know this firsthand because we work with most of the OEMs, is you've got a growing list of content that wants to make its way into the vehicle. But of course, today, each vehicle maker has their own independent platform. Ford's obviously done a great job with Sync, and Audi with Connect, and BMW with iDrive, Toyota with Intune, and the list goes on and on. So the problem is, if you're an application developer, you want to create an application, but you have to write basically 20 different versions on 20 different platforms to enable those applications to work. And of course, this is what's causing the delay and the frustration that people now experience with in-vehicle experiences. If you ask anybody, my wife's a good example. She just bought a brand new SUV. She got in the car, turned it on, and she says to me, boy, this UI sucks. That's not something I want to hear, because this is actually a customer of ours, but it's true, right? The problem is companies like ours have to engage literally 2 to 3 years before a vehicle hits production to start working on the software integration, the data integration. And then, of course, once that vehicle hits production, it could be in a production run for 6, 7 years after that. So quite literally, the software you have in your vehicle, on average, may be 5 to 6 years out of date. Of course, with mobile phone applications, they're being updated continually. And this is what's causing the frustration. You've got hundreds of app developers, hundreds of content providers that want to provide content. You've got dozens of OEMs that want to incorporate that, but it makes it very, very hard to do that. So we really feel that a solution's needed. And of course, Apple and Google have stepped in and said, hey, we have solutions with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Of course, the challenge, and you'll hear this from OEMs, and obviously Don mentioned it as part of his presentation, the challenge is that makes it very difficult on an automaker. They can't customize the user interface. It's one size fits all. What shows up in a Ford shows up in a Lexus, and what shows up in a Tesla shows up somewhere else. So it's the same user experience. More importantly, it's based on the mobile handset. So I have to bring in a mobile handset, which may not sound like a problem because all of us have mobile phones in our pocket, but it's not just any handset. You have to have an iPhone 5 or greater. You have to have an Android Marshmallow or greater. And even though that car's on the road for 6 or 7 years, those vehicles won't be able to support the continual evolution of the handset. And likewise, as Don mentioned, in markets like China, it's very different. LG, Samsung, and a variety of others have dominant market shares in these other countries. So the challenge is obviously how do you fit Android and Apple, because people have these phones, but at the same time create a unique experience, right? I'm never going to be able, from an Android phone, be able to say, open up the sunroof of my vehicle, which is obviously what Tesla has implemented with their software. You're never going to have rich access to vehicle-based data to be able to do autonomous or semi-autonomous type of scenarios. So there's a challenge with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. We believe the solution is an open industry platform. So what INRIX has done, and we announced several months ago, is we acquired a company called OpenCar, which has an open industry platform based on open standards, things like HTML5, Chromium, standard software development that allows app providers to write once and run across any vehicle line that has the platform. The challenge is always, how do you get this implemented? So the solution has to be, don't require application developers. You can't require Spotify to go rewrite everything they've got for some custom solution for an OEM. You have to give them software tools, you have to give them an environment that allows them to take their existing apps that they've created for the mobile phone and easily port that to an automotive experience. And at the same time, allow OEMs to have control over what happens. Allow them, you may not want YouTube, for instance, to be able to be displayed on the front screen of a vehicle that's moving. So how do you solve that problem? And this is something that we've now committed our entire company to helping address, and that is bringing together app providers and OEMs to create a platform. Because we honestly believe that the only way that the automotive industry is going to come even close to matching what we've seen in the mobile industry is by having common software development tools, make it very easy for app providers to write apps, update them over the air, but also give OEMs control. So our solution has 4 different components: an application framework that sits in the vehicle itself that abstracts the hardware in the operating system. And this is critical because you can't require different Tier 1 manufacturers, different hardware makers, and different car makers to have different operating systems or require them to use a standard chip or a standard set of hardware. So you have to basically allow a platform to run across any hardware, across any operating system. And that's what we've done with the application framework based on an open set of standards. Our SDK is a software development tool that allows rich application developers to do things like simulate what happens when a traction control message goes off. If I'm creating an app that requires me to open up the sunroof, how do I simulate what that looks like? So how do you take all this vehicle data, which is in an inconsistent format across a bunch of different car makers, and abstract that so the application developer doesn't have to worry about what it looks like? And that they can then test it and say, what does this look like on a BMW? What does this look like on a Volkswagen? What does it look like on a Ford? And be able to simulate that, write their tools, and be able to publish it without actually having to own the hardware that they're testing on. Right? Then you need an app store that allows application developers to submit apps and allows them to update apps. You can't require the application developer to snap to your timeline. They want to be able to update apps and write new features and add new apps as they want. But at the same time, you need the ability for the car maker to say, those apps I want in my car, these apps I don't want in my car. So unlike Android or Apple CarPlay, one size fits all, this gives the OEM control over what shows up and gives them the ability to say, what user interface do I want? Ford may want a blue user interface with red buttons and stylized backgrounds, and somebody like a Toyota may want something very different. So allow the developer to write once, run anytime, but allow the OEM to have different user interfaces, obviously per OEM. And then a learning platform, a machine learning platform that allows folks to intelligently learn user behavior, that allows the OEMs to have access to their vehicle data so that they can make, obviously, analysis on their users and how they're working. So we're quite excited about this. Obviously, you need content partners, and we're announcing at the show this week, not only, obviously, INRIX is providing our content on the platform, NPR, ParkMe, Yelp, VoiceBox, Stitcher, Rhapsody, iHeartRadio, Napster, Glimpse, CitySeeker, and a variety of others have already built apps that are running, and we're showing those in our booth. But the key is you need a lot of developers. Right? The apps that people want in China are different than the apps that people want in Japan, are different than the apps in North America and Europe. So we now have about 1,700 developers, which represent more than 150 companies building apps for the platform. So the promise is to solve this problem that we now face as an industry. Many of you may know that the percentage of millennials that actually have driver's licenses is dropping precipitously. In the last 3 years alone, 5% fewer millennials got driver's licenses when they turned 16. We've gone to a world where more than 90%, 10 years ago, of people who turned 16 got driver's licenses, to now 71% of millennials, when they turn 16, get a driver's license. I've seen this firsthand. I have 2 millennials, and about a third of their class does not have a driver's license. Why is that? And the answer is because, of course, power windows, power steering, tail fins or whatever, that doesn't get them excited anymore. The millennials want a digital experience in the car. That's what they get excited about. The first thing my son did when we got him a car is he started playing with the dashboard and started to see, can I play my music? Can I Bluetooth? What can I do? He could have cared less about any other feature on that vehicle. That's what we need to solve. We need to create a user experience as an industry that keeps up with mobile development, that's not 5 to 6 years out of date, that solves this problem for the millennials, for the digital generation, that has continually updated apps. And that's something that we hope to address. Thank you.